Good morning. We are going to be learning the Rambam and the Sicha on the Rambam, the Rebbe on Chelek Chof Zayin, Chag HaPesach, and going to see the incredible Chiddush that we have here in um, in understanding the breakthrough of this Rambam. But in order to appreciate it, I want to preface the general understanding of the Rambam of this halacha. But let's read the Rambam and then see how everybody else understands this halacha, and then see the insight of the Rebbe into this, and then discuss some of the points that perhaps about what the Rebbe says. Anyway, the Rambam Hilchos Chametz and Matzah, Perek Ches Halacha Yud, says the following. After discussing, going through the Seder, Perek Ches, he goes through the Seder of the night, and he writes a very interesting halacha. V'yesh lo limzoi kois chamishi. You can pour a fifth cup, the leimar olav halalagot, and say halagot. And what's that? Ad al narazvalo. Okay. Now there's an interesting lashon there. V'yesh lo limzoi. Continue. Now he goes into extreme detail in what status this kais has. The kais that einay chayva k'may arba kaises. It's not a chayv like the other ones. V'yesh loy ligmar es a halal b'chol mokum shir. It's not b'shein mokum sil. Okay. Now, just to get a quick rundown of the different opinions of what this kais chamishi is, not in the Rambam, in general. The source of this is dependent on how do we read a Gemara and whether the Gemara says something more than it says in our Gemara. In our Gemara, in Sochem Daf Kuf Yud Ches, it says Toner Rabbanon Revi Goimer Olavs Halav Oima Halagadol Liver Up there. However, Taisus brings there Revi Garcinon V'lei Garcinon Chamishi. Revi, not Chamishi. However, he brings some a Balatesis, I guess, or one of the people in his time. I'll talk about it in a second. Rabbi Yosef Teiv Elam, that he writes in his Sidroi, and these are the words that he says: Kimo lishtos maim yikones im chaylu istnis viboy mishtayacham mishum eines loime bechamishi halagodel yesh tanes. Now, just to know, quick information. Rabbi Yosef Teiv Elam was a Python. Besides everything, he wrote Piyut. Those who say Yetzers, I was told that there is a Yetzer that has all the halachis of the Seder that's said on Shabbos HaGodel. In Shemoneh Esrei, they say this Yetzer. Now, that was written by this Rabbi Yosef Teiv Elam, and that has, it's considered a halachic authority that obviously Taisus is quoting here. He's quoting from that Yetzer. He also authored what many say at the end of the Seder Chasal Siddur Pesach. So that's this Rabbi Yosef Teiv Elam, and he seems to say that if you want to drink water, you want to drink something, you have to drink wine because you are sick, so use it as a kais chamishi. Taisa argues on him. Now, let's go through some of the opinions quickly so we have an idea what's going on with it. That's Rabbi Yosef Teiv Elam. And there's no chiyuv. You want to drink? Take it. Make a case out of it. The Balamor, the Razo, says that Rav Tarfon holds that there is a chiyuv of 5 cases. Finished. We all know about Arvin cases. There's a chiyuv 5. The Ran vacillates between Mitzvah Amuvchar, Rishus, and he understands that that's the Rambam Shita, Mitzvah Amuvchar, or Rishus. The Rosh understands this Rabbi Yosef type elam that as long as you're thirsty, you can go ahead and have a kais chamish. Yeah. Again, the Rekeach holds a compromise. It's a chayiv, but don't do it by a seva. That was a little different. Yeah, okay. Those are the things. Now, I want to just discuss why is it that you can't drink wine? Now, we don't drink anything. That's we'll see. What are the issues here? Is it wine? Is it anything? So Yerushalmi says that drinking after the 4 cases is afraid of you getting drunk. And therefore, he says, either you'll forget to say halal, and also because you're supposed to sit and discuss Yetzias Mitzrayim all night. That's your It's not just a story of Rabbi Lezer. That's what it has to be. That's what should be. Obviously, many people can't make it that way, but that far. But my mother Shalom would always say, the Seder should have been a day after Erev Pesach, which this year comes out. Because after a whole work of Erev Pesach, how in the world do you expect somebody to be up so late? Anyway, he says, we don't want you to be kaveya yourself on yayin, and it'll be like you're eating in 2 separate groups. And also shouldn't be look like you're meisif ala cases, and that's why we don't let you drink any extra wine. And then there's a reason saying battle time matzah mipei validei shel, so you shouldn't lose the taste of the matzah. Now, if that is the case, so that's where the shaila also including water. Some say water won't be mevatel the case. Anyway, according to all opinions here, the question of the 5th case is a question of drinking, and the question is, are you mechuyev? You're not mechuyev. Are you allowed? You're not allowed. When you're allowed? Okay. Now, the Rebbe reads the Rambam, and the medayik in the Lashon Rambam, and it's a pella that nobody says this because it's so clear in the Rambam the way the Rebbe brings it out. So first he says like this: we don't find the Rambam using the Lashon here, mitzvah and amufchar, even though that is a common expression that he had. Now, being that I have access to the libraries, you do a search, and I found 7 times in Sefer Yad where the Rambam uses the Lashon mitzvah and amufchar. So why wouldn't he say it? It's a common expression of his. Why didn't he say it? Question number 2. Adiut number 2, that is. He writes, which seems to say it is a chay, but not like the arba curses. Then he has a strange lashon. V'yesh, we noted it when we read it. V'yesh loy limzay. Yesh loy is a chiyuv. It's not. Doesn't sound like. Obviously, others didn't learn that way, but that is the sound. And not a word about drinking. By the other cases, he writes, make a bracha, drink nothing. Vaisgin. Now, if you read in the Rambam, right before that he writes, on the 4th card, now the Rambam says, you're allowed to drink wine, you're allowed to drink water. But he says, other than that, nothing. And then right away he says, yes, the case Hamishi. How can it be? Just told you don't drink, now he tells you drink. Now, I want to add another diuk. there's Perek Zayin in Hilchas Chametz Matzah, and there's Perek Ches. Perek Zayin is the halachos. Perek Ches is the seder of the Haggadah, the seder of the night. In Perek Zayin, he repeats many times the fact that there are arba cases. Not a word about the fifth case. And Halacha Zayin, he writes, Kol echad vechad bein hanoshim chayav lishtas b'layla ze arba cases. 4 cups. Halacha Ches, Emes HaTzichen HaSeiba, Shazet Zayif Matzah, this arba cases. Again, 4 cups. A seiba by 4 cups. First one is noshim and non-noshim, men and women are chayiv to drink 4 cups. Halacha Tes, arba cases elu. Sarach limze geisen gedesha tiyashti areva. He continues in that halacha, shas arba cases elu miyayin shein mozik. Yotzi the arba cases. Again, arba cases, everything arba cases. Continues. Shas arba cases, mezugim b'bas achas, yotzi the chayirus, yotzi the arba cases. Halacha Yud, kol cases my arba cases elu mevarachal bracham neatzma. Arba cases. And then he goes on to enumerate and delineate each one of the things, what you say. Kais Rishon, Kiddush Hayom. Kais Sheni, Agoda. Kais Shlishi, Berchas HaMazon. Kais Revi, Goymer Es HaHalom Mevarach Halav Berchas HaShir. Not a word about a possibility of a Kais Chamishi, a half a Chiyuv, not Chiyuv. Not Neziga, not anything. And then comes Perek Ches. Suddenly, there's a mention of Kais Chamishi, which didn't seem to be part of the Seder before. So the Rebbe comes along and tells us that based on the Rambam, he wants to learn that the Rambam for Kais Chamishi is not to drink. Meiskin. And that answers all the questions. It's not part of the Arba case. Now the Rebbe goes on to a very deep understanding of this. He goes on to try to explain Reb Tarfon's shita, whether Reb Tarfon argues on them or doesn't argue. So then he comes on with this second approach that Reb Tarfon does not argue on the Tanakama. You only are required to drink 4 kaises, and that's all. Kais Chamishi is a chiyuv. Whatever chiyuv there is meizgin, and you say halal. But you do not drink it. And that explains the logic behind it. Kais Chamishi is different in its essence, in its chefza of the mitzvah. And that is, the gaya to the 4 kaises, the Gemara says, Arba kase tikni rabbanon derech cherus, kol chad v'chad navid bei mitzvah. And that's the Lashon Rambam, Kol Kais v'Kais, Arba Kais, and Varachal Brachon. Everyone. I just want to note that there's a he says, well, let me just finish up with what I was saying. That even in other words, that according to the Rambam, every one of the Arba Kaises is Cherus and Mitzvah of Neatzim. 2 separate things. And the Alter Rebbe said. But they are all of the same concept, which is they're drinking it l'cherus, and everyone has its own bracha and own amir. What you say about it and what you do. Comes Kais Chamishi. Not together, Kiyam Mitzvah Kais. It's a different type of thing. You don't drink it. And the amira, what you say on it, is not the same as everything else because there's no bracha. You're not chaysim bebracha. Whereas the amir of all the dalil cases, you chaysim bebracha. You end up with a bracha. And everyone said add another point to it. The Kais Chamishi is a halal on the fact that you did the other cases and you did the whole seder and all the mitzvahs that you did. That's the chiddush of the Kais Chamishi. No drinking. For a kais, It's not mechuyev like the others, but there is a chiyuv and so now a lot of the whole Lashon Rambam comes out great. You can't say mitzvah min hamufchar. It's not a mufchar of the other daled. Has nothing to do with kaisis. It's its own mitzvah. Not a mitzvah min hamufchar. It's its own Indian. That's why he writes a Lashon v'yesh loy limzei kais hamish. And a separate chiyuv. Nothing. It's not a mitzvah min hamufchar. It's a chiyuv, but it's a separate chiyuv. And that's why he speaks at length. That it's not chayva like the others, but it's a get of yeshloi. That's the kuda of what the Rabbi says. I want to just the chayva. There's something that has to be explained. True, you don't drink it, but why isn't the halal hagodol that you say an in of chayrus? Halal hagodol is an in of chayrus, an expression of chayrus. So why doesn't it have that part of chayrus? It's not part of the chayrus. Why not part of the chayrus? Why take it not? And specifically, the Rebbe explains the Sicha is Chelek Yud Aleph, the era, based on what the Alter Rebbe, Siman Tov Ein Beis, Sif Yud Aleph says, Eimosai Tzorech Lo Hosei B'Shas Achilas Kazayis. When do you have to have a seiba? So he says, Em says B'Shas Achilas Kazayis, Baruch Achilas Matzah, B'Shas Achilas Akricha. Matzah Mar, B'Shas Achilas Avikayim, B'Shas Shtiyas Daled Kaisim. Why? So he lists a bunch of things what you have to have a seiba for. Shekol Dvarim Elu Heim Zeichel Legula V'Cheirish Adaled Kaisim Diknach HaKomen Keneged Daled Shenish Legula Amur M'Bash V'Eira. Now there's an interesting thing here. Now watch the way the Alter Rebbe brings the pasuk. V'Yitzeisi V'Ga'alti V'Lakachti V'Yitzalti. That's not the lashon. That's not the order of the pasuk. Vitzalti v'Yitzeisi V'Lakachti V'Alti is say there in the pasuk, and he brings it differently. Yeah. He reverses words then. And then he goes, Afi Kaiman in the Kricha Zeichel HaPesach. Nechel der Cheres. Bechem Sicha Naseva der Cheres. Shakol Asud and Ratzalecha Belishus Belea Seva Shus B'Yoder and B'Yadnenu Latzricha Lahosiv. We don't have the ability to force them. Avi Komok HaMesim Chol Zer Yizme Shubach. Beisim Mitzvah Nabot. So there was Medayik and the difference of the Lashenis. And why did the Alter Rebbe change? So he explains that the Alter Rebbe changes the Seder according to what each of the cases stands for. Because those are what give the cases the reason. The first case is Kiddush. And there it says, it's Siyas Mitzrayim. That's what it says. The second case, we do the Haggadah. And the Kiddush is that the mitzvah is Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim over the Zchiras Yitzias Mitzrayim every day, and every day there's a mitzvah to remember Yitzias Mitzrayim because you have to discuss it at length, and that's Ga'alti. Because there the pasuk explains the nisim that happened, which it says Ga'alti Esach Mizraim the Tuyi B'Shvatim Gedalim. Asher Galonu V'Gal Saviseinu Gula. The third case is Birchas HaMazen, which is a Haida Antaroscha Shalimad Tanu, which is what we say in the second bracha of Birchas HaMazen. And if you don't mention it, you're not Yetzi Nechavasai. And that's connected to Lakachti Eschem Lilav. Aim as any Yetzi Lashem Lakach Alam. Lashem Lakach. The fourth case, you say Hallel, and you say the Birchas Hashir, And that's the Geya Be'ikid L'Gula Sida, and that's when we say Shrei Chamascha, and that's Vitzalti. I'm talking about the Tzalti Asam and Asam. That's a message, and it's also an Anshe L'Gula Sida, and that's the Rambam writes. So he says, all of these things. Oh, okay. And then these are things that the Rambam writes. Nobody knows how it's going to be. Okay, so it comes out that all these in Yonah that are said on the cases are matim to the fall of Shainis and Gula. Yeah, and all the guys that they're all a zeichel lecheirus legula lecheirus. So theoretically, you can say even though the fourth case we don't drink, but there is cheirus in what we talk about. So we need to understand why don't we associate that with cheirus? Again, I'm not sure this is what I'm saying is correct in the Rambam, but perhaps in the Rambam, and again, this is also based on a Sicha and Chelek Lamed Aleph Parshas Bay, where the Rebbe learns in the way the Rebbe learns the Alter Rebbe, and again, the Alter Rebbe is a lot based on the Rambam. The Rebbe says there, but the Rambam is a little different than the Alter Rebbe. Now I want to see. The Rambam says in Allah Perik Zayin Allah Chavov, Chol Der v'der Chayiv Adam Laharis as Atzim Yilumatzim Yotzim Atam Mishibet. Then he said, "Al Dovze Tziva Kodesh Baruch Hu B'Torah Zchar to Koimer Keilu Atam Atzim." He said, "Ever the Yitzos L'Chayif and this. You gotta see yourself as going out of." That's right. And then comes along Allah Zayin. He writes, "Leficha." Just say it. Adam L'Layla Zeh. When a person eats, Tzarich Lechoil. And then he writes everybody, and so, and then he writes about the cases. Then alochiches again. Famous Sicha said, "Because achilos says, not just this aber koisel. Shar achilos does him hezar hezar mishubach and lav ain't it so. And all other eating or drinking, if you were massive, it's good. There's either mishubach and that you don't have to." Now, go to Sichas. The Rebbe asked, why does the Rambam machalik two separate halachas? Because you say you don't have that, so I have a lishtas. Who makes it their head. And then the aim is that you're going to say, V'shas achila, and then, which is, the Rambam's there is not to be meirich so much. And he could have all included it in the first halacha, and it would have been much easier. And he said there are two dinim. There's a general halacha that a person has to show himself on Haggadah Derech, and that is through achilu shtiyah b'seir. It doesn't matter what you're eating, or what you're drinking. Then there is a din in each thing you're eating, in certain things that you eat that you're mechuyev asay, but in that thing, in order to fulfill that mitzvah, a t'nai in that mitzvah. Now, he said that this is even more obvious in the Alter Rebbe, Shulchan Aruch, similar to the Rambam. Now, I want you to listen closely to the Alter Rebbe, and I believe there is a slight difference. He starts off and he writes, "V'yochin mokem meishava sheyeshiv v'asei b'derech ha'eres k'derech shemalochem ha'gdelim eichlim v'she b'chol der v'der chayon l'haris v'sat." Everything you do should be derech. And then, after many sifim, he writes in detail many dinei haseba. And in the what needs haseba? Emes hatzarich lahosei, b'shas achilas k'tais matzah, achilas akricha, b'kemen, shtiz dal keses, b'shdral domen zeichel gula, v'ichem tzich haseba derech. So here again, the Rebbe brings out, you see, two dinim. It's a mitzvah of ne'atzmai, that you should sit there, I say, with their cheres, and then there's details when. But there are differences in the lashon. First of all, Al Rebbe starts off with V'yochin Mokim Meshevish Yeshin V'asei B'derech Eretz. K'derech HaMelachim Agdei L'meichem. He doesn't write, make your place that you should eat this way. You should sit this way. But the Rambam doesn't start like that. The Rambam just says, because just say it, you should do. Let's say it. You should have to eat and drink. Let's say. The Alter Rebbe writes, Lefi shebechol dover der chayiv odom. Now, this is a reason for Yochen Mokem Meshavet. The Rambam started over in the independent state. Bechol dover der chayiv odom. That's really that. And afterwards, he writes the results. The Alter Rebbe writes, Lefichach tzorach lasses kol ma'isa leilas aderech eretz. Not only achilish, the kol ma'isa. The Rambam writes, Eimat Sicha Hashem b'schas achilas gezayis matzah b'shtiyas arba cases. Specifically there. The Rambam, the Alter Rebbe writes, Chag kol asudo. Rotz alech lish la'aseh, mashuz b'yadam, maybe they're not Sicha l'haseh. You can't require him. I mean, come on, so it sounds like we can't. We should, but we can't. And therefore, it's an interesting lush. We can't do what we really would love to do, but we don't do it. And then I write, then they write mitzvah muvcha. Then they write mitzvah muvcha. It's meshubach. Ulai. That there's in this first way that the Rebbe says that there's an Indian of Haseba Kloli, not negated to the exact thing you're eating or drinking. According to the Rebbe, Haseba is a state of Cherus. Haseba is a state of Cherus. Obviously, you're going to lay down in the middle of the day. That's nothing. When you're at a meal and you say a state of a seba, you're in a state of chaos. When you're at a meal, obviously. When you go make a seba in your bed, that's not a seba. That's sleeping. That way, when you're in a state of going to eat, the actual seba is a metzius of chaos. And therefore, anything you do, well, that night, in the process of you're going to do, it should be derech haseba. It's but it's the act of aseva that's here that counts. Because if you're not eating and drinking, and you stop laying, you're a lazy good for that. Rambam, there is no aseva only has a mila when you're eating and drinking. Not because the eating and drinking needs aseva, because that's what makes it an act of Cherus. Anything other than eating and drinking is not an act of Cherus. Laying by the meal is not an act of Cherus. Again, that might be a nice thing, as the Alter Rebbe says, but the Rambam, it's the eating and drinking that makes it a Cherus. And that's the difference in the Lashanis. So, in other words, according to the Rambam, only when you do the actual act of Achil and Shtia, that's when you are. That's when your aseba becomes an act of chaos. During the process of eating and drinking, that chaos is considered an act of chaos. Just laying is an act of chaos in a format of eating and drinking. So I say back to what we said before is great. That what the Rebbe says that Kais Chamishi you don't drink is not Shaycheres. It has nothing to do with the Achila Shtia. Even if you just say whatever you say, saying is only Cheres when it has to do with an act of doing. Since you don't drink it, whatever you say has no value. And that's why you don't end with a bracha. It's nothing. Yeah, it's a nice thing to do, but it's an Indian. But where there's no union of a saver, no union of anything. And there's a Reb Chaim in Tzachim that he's medayik arba kase tikna bonon derech cherus kol chad never mitzvah. That the whole mechaya of never mitzvah is cherus. It's all cherus. And medayik and the Ram like that, but this is the same idea. Okay, so the end result is that Kais Chamishi is some kind of a chiyuv that was added. It is only a chiyuv of meziga, the way that I understand explains it, and it has no shaykhis to any of the cherus in the segment. Right? Stark, Atzlacha, Rabbi, Flagger sei gesund.